Members, I've received a letter from the Honourable Willow Jean Prime seeking to debate under Standing Order 399 the government decision not to set up a new redress scheme for survivors of abuse and care. This is a particular case of recent occurrence for which there is ministerial responsibility. The way that the state responds to abuse and care is a significant issue. This matter warrants the immediate attention of the House and the Government, as there are no other foreseeable opportunities to debate it. Therefore, following oral questions, I'll call on the Honourable Willow Jean Prime to move that the House takes note of a matter of urgent public importance.
Willow Jean Prime.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Soul-destroying is how one survivor responded to the government's shameful redress announcement on Friday. The hundreds of thousands of people who survived abuse and care have a right to feel disappointment and hurt due to this announcement. Mr. Speaker, the final report from the Royal Commission was clear. Survivors wanted an independent redress system, and funneling more money into systems that have harmed them in the past is, without question, the wrong call. Mr. Speaker, we offered to take politics off the table and to work with the government to make sure we lived up to the words in our formal apologies last year. But the government chose not to take up this offer. We are asking them to reconsider this. We are asking them to reconsider the poor decision they have made on redress and listen to the voices of survivors. Survivors shouldn't still have to be fighting for this. Many are tired of fighting. For too long, survivors have fought to have their voices heard, and it's a disgrace that still, after the formal apologies were made, they are still fighting. This is yet another injustice that survivors of abuse and care are having to deal with. Mr. Speaker, last year, the Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon, said in the Crown apology, quote, "I want to assure you it is our intention to have a new single redress system operating next year." During that speech, Mr. Luxon also acknowledged that many of you, understandably, do not want to engage with the current redress system. Some parts of it are 20 years old, and it can take up to 5 years for your claims to be addressed. The Royal Commission gave clear, very clear guidance to the government that survivors must be involved in designing and implementing this redress system. Survivors have spent decades fighting to be heard. The Royal Commission of Inquiry gave them an opportunity to share their often harrowing stories. It also gave them hope that their immense suffering, pain and trauma would be acknowledged, not only financially, but also through improved access to services and proper apologies. Now, yet again, they feel ignored and silenced, once again harmed by the very state that hurt them so much when they were supposed to be cared for. Mr. Speaker, what this government has delivered. Instead, the government have delivered nothing of what they promised, far from what survivors wanted. What the final Royal Commission report recommended, as survivor Keith Whiffen has put, is another backward step after we were given the opportunity to do something, really good and make a difference that has been ripped away from us. The Royal Commission was very clear survivors needed to be involved in designing and implementing a new independent system for redress. The government has also completely ignored that. Further, survivors of abuse while in the care of faith-based institutions have been excluded and are not eligible to seek redress under the current system. This is contrary to the Royal Commission's recommendation that the redress scheme is accessible to all survivors in state and faith-based care. The reactions to the announcement came through on Friday, Mr. Speaker, from two chapmen describing it as a kick in the guts, many saying they are hugely disappointed, another saying a slap in the face. Disappointed because they had so much hope in the government's words that were delivered in the formal apology, which said that they would set up a new redress system, and to have waited all that time from the apology until Friday, only to be told that that was not the case, that the government was going to simply be putting more money into the system which they have so many issues and grievances with, was for them, in their words, heartbreaking. I have many questions for the Minister. In particular, I want to know how it is that the Minister stood at the announcement and said that she had consulted survivors, that she had worked with survivors, with the high-level design group, that she was clear with them that their proposal was too unique and too ambitious, and that she had said that to them and made that clear to them, because that's not what I understand those who are involved with that understood from any meetings that they had with the Minister. Because if that was so clear, then why did they hold out so much hope that the government this year would announce a new redress system? If it was that clear last year when those conversations were apparently had, then why were they so disappointed in the Minister's announcement on Friday? I want to know what advice the Minister received about establishing an independent redress system. What advice did she receive? When did she receive that advice? What consultation did she do with survivors around the advice that she had received on setting up an independent redress system? When she has said that the high-level design group's report, which she had for well over a year, from the Royal Commission's 2021 report, was clear on what redress was required, how can she say that an independent redress system is too difficult and too time-consuming to establish? To be clear, the government has had more time than since the apology to do this work. When did the Minister cut survivors out of the process for the design of what was announced on Friday? And why did the Minister do that? When the Royal Commission and the high-level design group recommended that a foundation of any redress system had to be the active involvement of survivors all along, why did the Minister not do that? When will the Minister release the high-level design group's proposal, Pūtahi Te Mauri he Waiora e? And did she make any attempt to use the design proposals from the high-level design group's proposal, Pūtahi Te Mauri he Waiora e? And what advice did she receive and analysis regarding the high-level design group's proposal, Pūtahi Te Mauri he Waiora e, including aspects of it that can be implemented? Mr. Speaker, in the final minute that I have, I want to reiterate the messages that I again want to repeat. The call from survivors. We ask the government to reconsider their decision. We need to work closely with survivors. It's their voices that matter most on this. We said we'd do right by them, and this announcement is doing wrong. We must listen to their voices, to their experiences of distrust with the current system. Mr. Speaker, this has been, in my view, one of the most harrowing issues to come to this House. And it deserves the House's full attention and this government's proper consideration of truly considering the recommendations from the Royal Commission to redress those wrongs of the past. And so that is my challenge and questions to the Minister.
The Honourable Erica Stamper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to start my contribution the same way I started my announcement on Friday around the government's response to the new redress scheme. I wanted to, at the time, I said to the survivors who were listening in that I acknowledged them, their families and their supporters, and I said that waiting had not been easy, and I said that the decisions that we were sharing on the day would come with mixed emotions, and I want to reiterate that and also to thank them for all of the time that they had spent on the Royal Commission, many of them sharing their stories and many of them meeting with me and other ministers along the way to share their stories and their views. Mr. Speaker, the announcement on Friday was significant. Let's start with that. More than $750 million, $774 million is a pre-budget announcement, the single largest investment into redress in this country's history. Not only was there the redress part of that announcement, there was also a very significant investment into future-proofing the care system, making sure that we are reducing the numbers of young people and vulnerable people going into care, and when they are in care, making sure that the situations that they're in, the care agencies are strengthened and that they have the ability to let agencies know when things are not going well. So there was a range of announcements there as well, which I'd like to acknowledge. Mr. Speaker, when I announced this on Friday, I also said that I started by saying that nothing that this government would do would take away the pain from what has happened in the past, and we've always acknowledged that. We also acknowledged that there would be many survivors, and it was the same with Lake Alice, who would not feel that what we were announcing met their expectations. We've always acknowledged that as well. But what we have wanted to do with this announcement was to provide clarity, certainty and surety to survivors that we could get something up and running as quickly as we could to provide them with those things. The advice that I had received around creating something new and complex would have taken an extraordinarily long period of time and would have been very expensive on the one hand. The government and cabinet had to make a call on whether or not we went with something like that, highly complex, very expensive, take a long time, and may not get us the outcomes that we expect. And I think we all know what happens when governments try to create giant, complex, new things. It doesn't always go as planned. Or the other option in front of us was, here are some things that we can do now in moving the system towards that end goal. And it may well be that in the future we move to an independent system. But here is what we can do now, we can do quickly, we can get in place so that we can prioritise that certainty and surety for survivors and also make those additional top-up payments, create equity across the system, which I'll talk about in a moment. Those were the decisions that were put in front of Cabinet. And we had to make a decision in the best interests of survivors when it came to clarity and certainty and surety about what we could deliver to them. Now, we looked at what the Royal Commission had said in their recommendations, and it was clear that we needed to have something that felt and looked like one system. What we have now, Mr. Speaker, is multiple payment frameworks across multiple agencies with multiple front door entries and multiple people that you must deal with, or survivors must deal with along the way. That is not a good system. It is a system that's been in place for 20 years. And we know that that causes frustration and that it's not equitable, because we know that certain agencies have got different claims payment frameworks that they use, causing inequities across the system. What we saw from the Royal Commission is we needed to move away from that. And the first step of moving towards something in the future that may well be an independent state is that we had to get something that looked and felt like one single entity. So when a survivor was entering that system, there was one front door. There was one person to deal with. There was one common payment framework and one person you dealt with for all of, sorry, not you, Mr. Speaker, that survivor would deal with for all of their records. And so the intention that what we could do quickly and to give certainty and surety for survivors was to have this common payment framework across the agencies, to have one person they dealt with, one entry, so it feels like when a survivor is entering the system that it is one single entity. That was the intention and the driver behind much of what the Royal Commission said, and we acknowledge that, and that's what we can do now. And we know we can do it well and we can do it quickly. That was the decision that we had. We've got a very current, very complex system. The decision was to create another very complex, large bureaucratic system and then somehow merge these two very large, complex systems together. We've got to remember that other countries, Mr. Speaker, who have been dealing with this are not in the same situation as we are. They have not had a system that has been running for 20 years like we have. Many of them, in fact, almost all of them, are starting from a blank slate from scratch and creating something new. We are in a very different position where we have a very complex, evolved system that we need to get into good shape. And it's not to say, and I said this on the day, Mr. Speaker, that it may well be in the future that we move to an independent state. That will take some time and some cost. What we are doing now is moving in that direction. We announced that the other day, and Mr. Speaker, we know that we've already had a number of people who have come into the system and applied for their top-ups. In saying that, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to note the announcement on the day also was around making sure that we are going back over the historic claims, creating that consistency across the board to making sure that the payments that were paid out under health, for example, are equivalent to those paid under MSD. That was really important to do because we know that there are some agencies who haven't been paying as much over time because the frameworks have been different. That will be equalised, and then all of those people are eligible to apply for a top-up of another 50% on top. And moving forward, Mr. Speaker, claimants who come into the system, the average payment will climb by 50%. That, as I said earlier, was the single biggest investment in this system. What we are trying to do is create that certainty and surety today, and moving along what I see is a continuum that will have in 2027 a review to make sure that we are looking at the number of claimants coming forward, because it's really hard to pick the numbers, because even the Royal Commission said it could be anywhere between 30,000 and 250,000. We look at the numbers, which, by the way, Mr. Speaker, in this announcement, we are moving to be able to process more claims every year. And we'll take another look in 2027 to see if we need more resource. There may be future budget bid top-ups, and there may well be decisions made in the future once we've got this more of a single entity in place, that we cannot then take what will be a far less and complex system and shift it into something that is more independent. But that is what we are able to do now and able to do well. Mr. Speaker, I do want to respond to the previous speaker, because I think it's important to note that the previous government received the Royal Commission Redress into report in December 2021. They had 2 years to implement Redress, an Redress entity, if they thought that it was important, but they didn't. In December 2022, they implemented a rapid claims process in MSD, building on the very system they're now criticising for strengthening and investing in. Strengthening and investing in. I'm advised they did this without consultation with survivors. And then, Mr. Speaker, 3 months before the last election, they established a redress design group who heroically delivered their report in 5 months. So it is all very rich for the member to stand up and say that we are building on the current system is not appropriate when the previous government did exactly the same thing after receiving the Royal Commission design report, which stated exactly the things they're talking about today. They had time, if they wanted to do something. They chose to do absolutely nothing, and then they chose to put a group in place to kick the can down the road. We, Mr. Speaker, are investing $774 million. We are creating certainty and surety for survivors, which is far, far more than the previous government ever did.
Call on Kahurani Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today with a heavy heart to address an issue that has long been ignored, long overdue, and continues to fail the very people who deserve the most justice, the survivors of abuse in state and faith-based care. On Friday, the 9th of May, the government made an announcement regarding the redress system for survivors of abuse in state care. They allocated $774 million in the budget 2025 for abuse and care redress claims, a sum that survivors had hoped would bring them justice and healing. Unfortunately, this announcement is another letdown and deeply disappointing for survivors. I've been listening to survivors all weekend. They say they are angry. They say they are sad and that they are strong. There's a class action that has been started around the government's announcement that shows survivors will continue to fight for justice. They shouldn't have to, but they will not stop. The government's response to the Royal Commission of Inquiry into Abuse and Care fails to address key recommendations. These recommendations were worked on for years by experts and survivors to ensure that the Crown is accountable for the abuse to children that occurred on its watch and to ensure that no children are ever abused in care again, something that happens every day in our country, every day. This government's key recommendations, including the creation of an independent survivor-led redress system, and continues to exclude faith-based institutions from the redress process. It's clear to everyone, except the government, that this is not what survivors were promised, nor is it what they deserve. The Prime Minister's words from his apology speech on November the 12th, 2024, he assured survivors that, quote, "It is our intention to have a new single redress system operating next year," end quote. The government's announcement is a continuation of the same broken system, one that failed survivors in the first place. There is no independent survivor-led redress system as promised. Survivors continue to be left in a system governed by the very people and institutions that cause them harm. Of the 138 recommendations made, 105 directly relate to the government. Of these, only 12 were fully accepted. And we're left with a redress process that still fails to include faith-based institutions that horrifically played a major role in the abuse survivors, children, endured. This is not progress, this is deeply unjust. $774 million is woefully insignificant. It fails to meet the scale of harm done to these survivors, these children, and is well below the international standards for compensation. It is tokenistic, it is disrespectful, and it is not enough to make up for the trauma and suffering that these survivors experienced and the generational trauma that continues today. In the words of Annabelle Ahuriri Driscoll, the co-chair of the Redress Design Group, quote, "The payments processed are still considered lower than other jurisdictions." Ihurangi Rewiti Peters says the government's response is another broken promise by this government. Murray Helsley of the Network of Survivors of Faith-Based Abuse stated that faith-based survivors feel that they have not been listened to at all and are being thrown back on the tender mercies of the very institutions that abused them in the first place. Kevin Whiffen expressed that Friday's announcement was topping up an existing rotten process. Carl Tody, spokesperson for NZCAST, New Zealand's largest survivor-led rōpū, said, "We exist because the system that was supposed to protect us failed us, and it's still failing us. I call on the government to return to the table and listen to survivors, and I call on my fellow members of the House to stand with me today in ensuring that the government's response is not the final word on this matter."
Call on the Honourable Karen Chor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very sensitive topic for many, and if we look at the timeline of the actual inquiry into the abuse in state care, it's quite horrific how long it's actually taken to get to this point for survivors of abuse in care. So if we look when this first began, when we started the inquiry in February 2018, it then took a few years for us to get to this stage where the redress report and recommendations were ready. And the previous government received that redress report and recommendations in December 2021. Then fast forward 2 years into 2024, the report was finally tabled in this House. So the time frame from when the report and recommendations were received in December 2021 to the time it was even tabled in Parliament was quite distressing for survivors in itself, because knowing that those recommendations were ready and knowing that the previous government had an inkling of what was required by survivors for 2 years before this report was even tabled. You would have thought, even though it wasn't tabled publicly in those 2 years, that the previous government would have been making plans in the background of what they were actually going to do in response once this was tabled. But unfortunately, the only response that happened, from what I can tell, is that rapid claims were looked into through MSD. The current system that survivors were saying very loud and clear was not a system that they were happy with. So fast forward to now, when, as a government, we are very committed to victims of crimes, of sexual harm and violence. We want to make sure that we get this right for survivors in care. My response to this is looking at the $774 million investment into the redress system and also strengthening the care-based system to prevent, identify and respond to abuse in the future is a good start, because at least we've laid out in black and white in a short time frame of what we are actually going to do, not only for survivors of abuse in state and faith-based care in the past, but what we're going to do in the future to prevent them from happening again. Because, Madam Speaker, to be perfectly honest, compensation is not just about money. Redress is not just about money. It's also about knowing that our voices are being heard, that the hurt and harm that has been brought to this House and put in black and white in a report of what has happened, that their voice mattered and counted towards making sure that governments in the future and agencies in the future are doing everything they possibly can to prevent that harm from happening again, which is what this government has made a commitment to doing. We are in the process of implementing a seamless service so that survivors with claims with multiple agencies now will have the ability to have those claims managed by one point of contact. Now, Madam Speaker, that is not a separate system in itself, but quite frankly, I would rather that all of that $774 million be invested into the survivors than building up a new system that may take years when these survivors have waited long enough to have their claims addressed. We may not even know if creating a new system will make that better in the future. This is not saying that we can't do this in the future, but just making sure that we address this as quickly as possible, allow claimants to make their claims, allow claimants that have previously made claims to have top-ups as quickly as possible, so that we're not dragging them through what's next for more years to come. Because, Madam Speaker, that is actually worse than doing something right now. And we need to make sure that we are doing something now, that we are showing our commitment, and that moving forward we are committing to make sure that this kind of horror does not continue into the future. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Madam Speaker.
Honourable Casey Costello.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it is, I think, timely to recognise, as the Minister reflected, that this is a difficult and troubling process that we have to work through, and it is a process that has sat around for a long time to seek resolution. And will there be a perfect answer? Will there be the ability to rectify the harm that was done? I would suggest not. We have a very difficult task ahead, and the perfect solution does not exist, because every single individual that has been harmed, that has been damaged, has their own individual story, their own individual expectations. And our job in this House and in this government is to try and wade through with a clarity that will provide some direction, some trajectory under which we can seek to diminish the challenges that are being faced by these individuals. And I think it is really important that we do not use this as a political football to kick around this House, using those very voices that we need to be listening to, and we actually look at how we can make these decisions reflective of the voices that you're hearing, and how we can continue to develop a process. As the Minister has outlined, we are not at an end point, we are on a journey. But what this government had to do was make some decisions about a pathway forward. They had been waiting long enough. And is it the perfect solution? We will not know, because every single person, as I said, has their own expectations and their own harms to heal. But what we do know, rather than heckling in this House, is that we have invested $774 million into a process, into redress, into something that is tangible, that we can say there are some actions underway. And it is tragic that we are not revisiting this message over and over again, that we are on a pathway. And this is a solution that we will work on, that we will develop. But this end point, this new system, this new redress system, as we've said repeatedly in this House, there is no perfect system, but we could have spent an inordinate amount of time trying to develop this new redress system. But what we do have is something that we can hear what have been the issues and what have been the frustrations, the single point of entry, the time it's taken to be processed. All of those things have been taken into account as we have discussed this issue. And therefore we are trying to fix those things to ensure that this money is directed where it needs, that we are increasing the average payments, that we are topping up payments to survivors so there is an equity. We are providing higher payments for those where there has been the highest level of egregious harm. We are increasing the capacity to process those claims. As I've said, a single point of entry into the system, and we have established an independent review and access to support. These are not small things. This has been an incredibly tough decision, and we cannot risk harming those who are seeking support and guidance by making this all about what has missed out and not about what is being delivered. And we will continue to listen. And I would say really categorically, as I have stood beside the Minister talking to these survivors about their journeys and their stories, every single story is individual and every single story has been listened to. But can we meet everybody's expectations? Unfortunately not. But what we can do, instead of sitting in a paralysis of the perfect solution, is not let that perfect be the enemy of the good. And we have to make sure that we do something. And that is the discussion that we should be having.
Mauri Mino Kapakingi.
Tēnā koe, Madam Speaker. Tēnā tātou te whare. When I first spoke on this take, I guess the gallery was full. And apart from a number of things that I said, I do remember saying this, and I know that it landed, not only with the House, but particularly with the gallery. I said, because we apologise here in the House does not mean that you have to be ready to forgive us. And that point is still so real in my mind, in my heart, Madam Speaker, and I want to land it here again and ask all of us, particularly government, to consider this. The best definition that I've ever heard of forgiveness, by the way, is this. The best definition: to give up your right to resent. The definition: to give up your right to resent. There's not a single thing in the announcement that says to me and to the many that we know and that are survivors of this, Madam Speaker, would consider this a reason to give up their right to resent. In fact, what it does say is continue to hold the resentment until the forgiveness is clear and shown in the announcement and anything that this government will do. So I want to make those points as I open up my discussion. To say this is a violent regime of disrespect against survivors. When I was listening to some of the discussion earlier, the words, this is investment, 744 million of investment, like we're doing you a favour. It's such a strange word to use, the word investment, when this is about harm and trauma that have been caused to so many. So, well, here's the 30K payout. This is and used it as an investment discussion. I don't understand that, and I find it strange and offensive, actually. So let's say that. I'll repeat it. $744 million split across 200,000 survivors of abuse in state and faith-based care. Equates to only 30 each. That's your total compensation for state-sanctioned abuse. Sorry about it. That has completely derailed the lives of survivors and in actual fact derailed the lives of generations following. That inquiry was meant to be a turning point of transformational change, but this coalition government has chosen to continue the legacy of abuse. To say as well, I was listening to it again, you know, this, to not turn this into a political football. Let me say that there are many a whānau and family member that is saying, get into that house and make this discussion. Whether it's, you know, political football, I mean, I don't even understand that idea. Everything that we do in this house and say in that house has to carry some power and importance so that our family do go, yeah, Mino, you're saying what we need you to say. So don't back off saying it, whether it's a political point or not. Make our voice heard in this house. So that is why I'm standing to talk to this issue today. I mean, I want to mihi tualo for actually raising it in this way, Madam Speaker, and to bring this to another opportunity to call, to change the minds of government, to go from your head to your heart and understand what this means for family and whānau. This government has offered band-aids for bullet wounds, and the minister should be ashamed, deeply ashamed, just as every other complicit member of parliament in the coalition government should be too, because to reject the findings, and let me just say that again, to reject the findings of the commission is to reject the truth. Te Pāti Māori remains unwavering, Madam Speaker, in this commitment to justice. We will continue to fight this, we will continue to name it, and we will continue to reject it and to say the names and the voices, bring the voices of our whānau to the House. Good intentions, and I heard that phrase earlier too, good intentions is simply not enough. It is the road to future harm and hell, and that we stand as Pāti Māori and reject the ongoing position and the ongoing harm and abuse in care. Madam Speaker, tēnā koe.
Helen White, thank you. I'm really concerned about what we are talking about today, because I think it shows that the government is ignoring the lessons learned from the people who are affected by this, who went before a royal commission and told their stories. That is of deep concern when a government this new has forgotten how to listen, has forgotten how to connect with the very people that the government, and we are the government that was responsible for state care, the government caused that harm. And it has immediately turned around and done something that is offensive to those people immediately. It's only 18 months in, and this is where it's at this incredibly insensitive level. What people said to that inquiry was that they had absolutely no faith in the current system. They said it wasn't independent, it wasn't informed by the trauma that they'd been through. It did things like delayed matters, it belittled them and minimised what was going on. We had an issue come up last year where we were talking about the role of the state when there was a prosecution on issues of sexual abuse and this kind of violence, and how the Crown prosecutor had looked at that situation, the Solicitor General, and tried to minimise what had happened, denied claims, because that's what they thought their job was as Solicitor General. That is what happens when you don't have anyone independent in a role, when you confuse your role. That is what happens, and it caused so much harm to so many people. And we had a royal commission that did incredibly good work, and it came out with a finding. It said that what had to replace this system was a survivor-led, survivor-designed redress system. Now, I have heard the Minister talk about how today she said it was only that we were trying to create one single entity system, and that was too difficult in the time frame. I've heard another minister say that we can't wait for the perfect system. I don't think many survivors in this country expect the perfect system. I think they expect a half-decent system, a system that doesn't re-traumatise them. And it's our job, because we lead this country, to do a better job of giving them what they need, because we, the state, hurt these people, and we did despicable things. This is not something that we can take lightly. This is what we're here to do, to lead. So I reject the characterisation of this debate and the objection of the opposition to what has been announced as somehow looking for a perfect solution. I reject that. It is really important that we face this practically. Practically, we needed a new system. And the reality is that this government is not going to give a new system that actually helps people and doesn't harm them to the survivors of this terrible atrocity, because that's what it is. It's an atrocity. We need a system that doesn't traumatise people. Now, I went to see something recently. It was the Pahutakawa Centre. It's a clinic that deals with people who have been raped, basically, and sexually abused. And one of the doctors said to me, the thing about this system is people come out a little bit healed. That is the measure that we should be looking at. We should be trying to create a system that brings about a little bit of healing for people we have seriously harmed. I just wanted to end with a statement that I read from a person reacting to the coverage on this. It was a person in a newsroom article. He said, torture and abuse, including being repeatedly abused by the legal system, and a resultant lifetime of despair is worth $30,000. Actually, that's for very few of the claimants. They mainly would get 3. I might be a little naive, although I don't believe so, but put this up against $2.9 billion tax break for landlords, and it doesn't appear that this government has any moral compass. Thank you.
Mr.
Honourable
Speaker,
Louise
Madam Speaker, I want to start as I did on the day of the Crown apology by acknowledging the survivors, and in particular to acknowledge that far too many were deaf and disabled New Zealanders who were abused in care. And I want to put very carefully on the record, Madam Speaker, the enormous time and energy that the Minister in charge of the government response, the Honourable Erica Stanford, has put into this. And the comments from the other side to suggest that she hasn't wholeheartedly listened to survivors, met with them, heard their views, and although many of those views differed, to then try to find a way through that will never satisfy everybody's concerns, but satisfied enough for us to at least make a start in righting the wrongs. So I do want to acknowledge the Honourable Erica Stanford, and, you know, as many members across this House have done, those of us who have met with survivors and listened to them are only acutely aware that no amount of redress will take away the trauma that was inflicted upon them. And so it is in that context, Madam Speaker, that navigating a way through where, you know, one of the very common threads that survivors have said is they are sick of waiting. And that was a big consideration in the government working out, you know, this completely new redress system that actually wouldn't have got any redress out the door in the short term. The challenge of that was actually too great for us to accept. And so that's why, by listening to the survivors, by listening to the things that they prioritised in terms of making it simpler, making it easier, giving them one point of contact, some of the key parts in the improvements that have been made have been absolutely in response to the feedback they gave. Is it perfect? It never will be. There will never be a perfect solution to this. But actually, the opposite side of the chamber can't just sit there and say this is about the government's intentions. We've actually announced a significant way forward, which is a start. And no amount of money will ever take away what has happened to a group of New Zealanders that it should never, ever have happened to. But instead, we need to focus on practical things that will mean that we can make progress in redress. And I want to say, Madam Speaker, because the team at the Ministry of Social Development who have dealt with claims already, and actually on Friday with the announcement as of 2 p.m. yesterday, had almost 350 top-up applications. That is delivering for survivors. As I said, it may not be perfect, but it is a very important start in improving what we have. And I do want to also put on record, Madam Speaker, the team that I have met, who are the ones who are at the end of the phone, who are that one point of contact, are an extraordinary group of New Zealanders and public servants who get up every day to provide support and assistance to survivors of state care. And I want to put on record my thanks to them. There is more work to do, significantly so, and the Minister outlined that. And I also want to make clear, as she asked me to pass on, we still are yet to make decisions about those who are abused in faith-based environments. Madam Speaker, this is an enormous piece of work. It won't just be our government, but governments of the future. And I think we should focus on the survivors, not on politics.
Glenn Bennett.
Kia ora, Madam Speaker, and for us on this side of the House, it is about the survivors we stand today. It is about the survivors that my colleague, the Honourable Willow-Jean Prime, put in a request for a debate, because the survivors have been asking us, have been pleading with us to actually speak up and speak out in this House around what we can be doing to do what is right. What is right. It's not easy doing what is right. It is not cheap doing what is right, but to honour, to help in the restoration of mana for so many survivors, it is about doing the right thing. That is why we on this side of the House stand. That's why we on this side of the House are doing our best to be a voice and to push government. It is to be political. It is to be political for the right decisions to be made. When just under a year ago the Royal Commission report was presented in this House, the byline of it was through pain and trauma, from darkness to light. From darkness to light. And that is the challenge we are wanting to continue debate in this House, but as we move forward, how do we move from that darkness into that light? And it is about an apology, but it also is about us as the state, us making bold, courageous and difficult decisions to restore mana for those who it was lost often for many of them many, many years ago due to what we as a state, we as the church have done. And it was a couple of weeks ago, I turned on Whakata Māori and saw the documentary, The Stolen Children of Aotearoa. And for anyone who hasn't seen that documentary, which follows a number of survivors, I challenge you to watch it. It is not easy to watch, but it creates more of the story. It creates a depth of the story for understanding for us, not only as a parliament, for us as a community, to look at what we can be doing because of what we did do in terms of how we ignored and how we swept this under the carpet for so long. And I just want to challenge the government, and I want to challenge the Prime Minister directly in my contribution this afternoon, as he stood in this House with a full gallery, with this Parliament full of survivors who heard him apologise last year. And I want to quote him, because he said, "I know that financial redress is important to many of you, and no amount of money will ever make up for what you have endured." And then we go on to say, Madam Speaker, that many of you, understandably, do not want to engage with the current redress system. He said that, the Prime Minister, he acknowledged it. And he also committed to this year, in 2025, establishing a new single redress system that will be operating in the year to come. Well, we're in that year, and then last Friday, survivors are handed what the government handed them, and it's not okay. We look at what the Royal Commission recommended as well, Madam Speaker, and they also talked very clearly about the fact that survivors are looking and needing a system that is designed specifically for them to be independent, for the redress to be meaningful. Because why would you go back to your oppressor with your hands out asking for some crumbs? Why would there not be a separate system set in place, Madam Speaker? And finally, I just want to reflect on the survivors. And as I watched that documentary, we heard people speak who were in Ipuni Boys' Home. We heard people speak who were in other spaces like Kimberley and Lake Alice. And those were institutions that this Parliament ratified and supported. And we need to come back to the survivors. We need to come back to those places that this system allowed to establish and say no more, because we need to look forward. We need a separate system, and we need the government to do what they said they were going to do and create a new system.
Joseph Mooney.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to speak in this urgent debate this afternoon, and I want to take the opportunity at the outset to acknowledge again, because I've had the opportunity to speak on this topic before, the survivors, Madam Speaker, and the hurt and the pain that they've experienced, and their justifiable desire to see this appropriately acknowledged by this House. And money doesn't solve all things, but certainly it is an important part of the redress process. And this government, Mr Speaker, has committed the single biggest investment in this pre-budget announcement recently given for redress in this country's history. So that is the single biggest investment for redress in this country's history, $774 million, Mr Speaker. I note the concerns that are being addressed and have been raised in response to this urgent debate, which is the concern that there isn't a independent organisation that's responsible for that redress system and the redress payments. But the government was faced with a difficult choice, Mr Speaker. Does the government spend more time and money on setting up a new scheme, or does it provide more to survivors now through the current process? And that's through the current redress process. And the decision of the government, Mr Speaker, was to ensure that as much of that $774 million that is going to go towards redress would go directly towards those affected, rather than spending that additional money and time on setting up an independent process. Now, I do note that it was the survivors' concerns were carefully taken into consideration. The survivors' concerns that trust and confidence in redress is certainly integral to ensuring a positive claim resolution, and concerns of the survivors that the state claims process would be managed by the same institutions that were responsible or had agreed care responsibility for survivors, which the Royal Commission found had contributed to low trust regarding the integrity of claims outcomes. To address that concern, Mr Speaker, there will be a process for an independent review of claims if survivors are unhappy with the decision and the redress payment that is being offered. So that is an important component of this, to ensure there is an additional mechanism to address concerns if survivors have those about the way that the system is interacting with them. I would note, Mr Speaker, that this $774 million package includes increasing the average redress payments for new claims from $19,180 to $30,000. So it's a significant increase in the average redress payments for new claims that this package enables. And that is part of making sure that this additional money can go to survivors through this. It's also providing for higher payments for the survivors who experience the most egregious abuse. It's providing top-up payments of 50% to survivors who have already settled claims to ensure consistency with increased payments for new claims. And is introducing a common payments framework so that survivors receive the same financial redress for similar experiences of abuse, regardless of where in state care that abuse occurred. There's also increasing the system capacity, Mr. Speaker, to process claims from 1,350 to 2,150 per year from 2027 to reduce wait times for current claimants, because the government recognises that time is moving and the government wishes the time to move quickly to get those payments to survivors. It's also implementing a seamless service so that survivors with claims with multiple agencies have those claims managed by one point of contact. And it's introducing a single entry point for survivors wanting to register new claims, as well as what I mentioned before, introducing an independent review. An independent review is important for people who are unhappy with their redress offer. And there's also funding for redress agencies to provide survivors with access to supports and services. I would also note, Mr. Speaker, that a real concern of survivors is around ensuring that there's a prevention, identification and response to any abuse in the future to try to stop this from happening again. And so this package also includes investments in the wider care system over the next 4 years, including such things as $71.5 million to build a capable and safe care workforce for children and vulnerable adults, and over $50 million to make mental health inpatient units safer and improve privacy and dignity for patients. And there's more, but I run out of time, but this is a very good package, Mr. Speaker.
The time for this debate has expired.